Welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed my Americanisms explained. Uh, I've got lots more. We're really weird here in America. I say that, but really the oddity is from whoever's perspective is odd. So while I think there are tons of things about America that are odd, a lot of what I'm looking at for making these lists when I do research and stuff is things that people from other countries feel are odd about the United States. And that being said, there certainly are a lot of them. But by that same token, there are tons of things that I find odd about the rest of the world. So we're all odd. But anyway, let's get into the Americanisms explained for today. So there's a common saying that Americans think age is incredibly important, and that by that same token, that distance is not something that's I forget exactly how the saying goes, but something like we're easily impressed by age and not so much by distance, whereas in the rest of the world, distance is something that can be impressive, can be a factor, while age not so much. And I think that the reason for that is that the United States is barely over 200 years old. The United States. Now, I did some looking, and the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in North America is in St. Augustine, Florida, and it is 457 years old. Now, again, by looking around online, the oldest city in the world that has been continuously inhabited is possibly Jericho. Jericho is around 11,000 years old. So incredibly, incredibly ancient city. Now, I've been to Rome, I've been to Tokyo, I've been to Kyoto, and I've been outside of the United States to Canada. But Canada's kind of in the same boat as the United States, being that Canada was settled around the same time as the United States. As far as European settlements, permanent European settlements go, yes, the Vikings may have come earlier than that, but they didn't leave behind a permanent settlement in Canada. So anyway, Tokyo is actually younger than St. Augustine, Florida. I was surprised with that. And when I was looking into the history of Tokyo, I was thinking, well, surely Tokyo has been around for thousands of years. No, it's only been around for about 419 years. However, Rome is 2,774 roughly years old. Kyoto is 1,228 years old. And Japan, interestingly enough, Japan is possibly the oldest country in the world that still exists today. Yeah, we have things like Israel and stuff, but Israel, the current version of Israel, was only established in the 1960s, I want to say, shortly after World War II. So while there may be old cities there, Japan is around 2,600 years old, which makes it around the oldest country in the world. So the United States, we declared our independence from Great Britain in 1776, but the Constitution wasn't adopted that made the United States until 1787. So since the Declaration of Independence, that's 246 years, and then we've only been a country for about 235 years. So we're very young as far as that goes. So we are easily impressed by buildings, by cities by things that are incredibly, incredibly old. But the rest of the world, Oxford University was established before the Aztec Empire, if I remember the fact correctly. So the thing is that, like I said, we're easily impressed by age because we've got nothing over here that's as old as some of the stuff that's is found in the rest of the world. Now, there are some prehistoric civilizations and stuff there are remnants of those that are incredibly ancient around here, but it's not like I'm walking down the street regularly past a building that could be thousands of years old. That's something that you only find elsewhere in the world. All right, moving on. Public transportation. Now, public transportation in the U.S. is problematic at best. There is a strong car culture in the United States, and I've talked about it before. I believe it was in one of my videos about explaining American school things about American schools, because like I said, our high schools tend to have large parking lots because kids can get their driver's license when they're 16, and shortly thereafter they can have their own car. I've known actually a few people whose parents were wealthy enough to buy them a car even before they had their driver's license. It was basically just sitting there waiting for them to get their driver's license before they could just take it. And because of that, a car is a status symbol here. If you're wealthy enough to own a car, that says something about you, that you have the means to get yourself where you need to go. So there's a certain amount of status in owning your own car. There's also somewhat of a stigma. In my mind, that stigma is erroneous when it comes to riding public transportation. Now, public transportation isn't always very good in the United States. It's not always kept up very well. And so there are lots of horror stories about, getting into subway cars that just smell like urine. And there is kind of a connotation of, if you ride public transportation, you're too poor to afford your own car. So, people who are rich don't, or people who feel the need to show off their status don't use public transportation because, that's for poor people. So there's a certain amount of stigma against riding public transportation. I grew up riding the bus. Now, that's not to say that I didn't have a car when I turned, I had the availability of cars. We didn't actually get a car. I didn't get my own car until I was much older than 16, but I could drive my parents' cars. My parents each had a car. And that's, again, it's pretty normal for a family to have multiple cars. There's one for mom, one for dad, possibly one for even the kids. Possible multiple cars for the kids. Anyway, that being said, I grew up riding the bus. And when I was out of the country in both Italy and Japan, I rode public transportation a lot because it was just the easiest way to get around. The problem with the public transportation in the United States, as I see it, is it's not as well developed as what you have in Europe and other parts of the world. And because of that, it's not as convenient. And that's plays into my third point here, that the convenience just isn't there for us. Right now, in order for me to take the bus to work, I would have to walk about 15 minutes to the nearest bus stop. And then it would probably take me another, it would probably take me about an hour to get from my house to work. And I'd have to change buses at least once to get from where I live to work. And so it would take me roughly 2.5 hours a day riding on the bus to get to and from work. Whereas it only takes me about max, if the roads are really busy, maximum it would take me would be 30 minutes both to get to and from work if I drive myself. So the convenience factor just isn't there for us. And in a lot of places, some of the bigger cities, New York, Chicago, some of the bigger cities out in California, things like that, where they really, really need that public transportation system to be quite robust. There's not such a problem out there as it is in some of the other parts of the United States. The other thing is that if I want to go to another state, it'll mean that I either need to take a plane or drive myself. We don't really have a good interconnected public transportation system like it exists in Europe, where I can get on a train in one country and just ride it into another country. We don't really have that here, not state to state. It just doesn't exist. And so it's just so much more convenient to get a car or to take a plane to go from place to place. And this kind of plays into that distance thing being not so great. Where I mentioned before, we're easily impressed by age, not so much by distance. And that's kind of because we just get in our car and go wherever we need to go. All right. Walking to school. Now, this is something that to me is really weird. When I grew up, I walked to school. I didn't get a ride to school until I was in high school. So I spent about 10 years of my life walking to and from school. Every once in a while, if it was really bad weather or whatever, I'd get my mom would drive me to school or something. But when I was elementary through junior high school, I walked to and from school. It wasn't, like I said, until I got into high school. And when I got into high school, my friends had cars. And so I just rode to school with a friend. So it was very much normal for me, for my brothers and sisters, for all of us to walk to school. My own children walk to school. So I've heard some horror stories about people coming from other countries, moving to the United States, allowing their kids to walk to school, and then having Child Protective Services called on them. I've never been a witness to that, and so I would really have to know more information about like the area, because there are places where maybe it's not safe to allow your children to walk to school, and if you come from a culture that walking to school is the norm and it's considered very safe, and you are now in an area where it's not considered safe, and you don't know that it's not considered safe to allow your children to walk to school, that could be a problem. But it could also be that we do have people here in the United States that are a bit of what we call a Karen, somebody who's a busybody and just likes to interfere with other people for their own sense of gratification. And people like that, they suck, and they should mind their own business. So if it's not a dangerous place, it is fine for you to let your kids walk to school. It's fine. Now, if it's a dangerous, busy place, I could see you needing to either escort your children to school or drive them to school. But in a lot of places, it's really not a problem to allow your kids to walk to school. It's not going to hurt them. It can only be beneficial because it's going to give them some exercise. Kids need that. Voting. Voting here in the United States is not mandatory, but I believe it should be. It would definitely get a lot more people out to vote. However, the problem, I've heard this tossed around before about mandatory voting, and people always basically it's encroaching upon their freedom, and so they don't believe in it, blah, 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 whatever that, there's a lot of things that we do here in the United States to protect personal freedom. And this could be one of them. The other thing is that I believe we should go further than just making voting mandatory. I believe that we should make you prove that you're a citizen before you vote. That's something that every time it gets brought up, it gets shot down because it's racist or exclusionary or something. I really don't understand it, because only citizens should be voting for government stuff here in the United States. If you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be voting because you're not a citizen. It's not like I go to another country and expect, as a non-citizen, to be allowed to vote there. That's stupid. Anyway, that's a rant for another time. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is being multilingual here in the United States. It's a lot less common. It's not uncommon, but it's a lot less common than you find in places where different languages are very close to each other. Here in the United States, if I move one state over, everybody still speaks English. If I go to Canada, everybody still speaks English, and everything's still written in English. It may be in French too, but it's also in English. But if I'm in Europe and I move the same distance to go from that I would to go from state to state here in the United States, I might be in another country. And that other country doesn't speak the same language that I do. And so it's a lot more important, a lot more common that you find people who are multilingual in other parts of the world. Now, that's not to say that every part of the world has a bunch of people who are multilingual. It just is a lot more common in places where you have a lot more languages that are closer together. So in Europe, you're going to have a lot more multilingual people. It could... I, myself, am bilingual. I've been to multiple countries. I say multiple. It's been 3. Canada, Italy, and Japan. I only speak 2 of the languages of those 3 countries. I speak English and I speak Italian. And Japan was easy to get around in. Google Maps was awesome. It got us everywhere we needed to go. It also had a translate feature if we needed it. But most of the signage and stuff was also in English. And so, when we go to a restaurant, we'd sit down and they'd basically come over to take our order or whatever. And we just have to point to the menu, because the menu was, it wasn't in English, but it had pictures. And we could just say, I want that. Just point to it at on the menu. But the other thing is that in thinking this through, you're going to get a lot more people, or you're going to get a lot more people who are bilingual, multilingual, if there's a place to actually practice the language. And for me, I find it very difficult to practice Italian. I don't have, there's not a large Italian community near me where I can go and make use of Italian. It's just not there. And so I have to practice where I can. However, Spanish, it might be very easy to become bilingual, to pick up Spanish, because we have quite a few Spanish speakers. I mean, just living on my street, there's a couple families that speak Spanish. I work with Spanish speakers, native Spanish speakers. And so it would possibly be fairly easy to become bilingual, English-Spanish, if you're living here in the United States, whereas certain places it might be a lot more difficult to pick up another language just because you don't have the opportunity to practice it. In order for me to regularly practice Italian, I'd have to move to a place in the United States, maybe New York, that has a strong Italian community, or I'd actually have to go live in Italy for that. whereas Spanish, we've got a lot of Spanish speakers, so it would be a lot easier. Now, they do encourage us to study a language in school. For instance, I studied French in junior high, but I can't say that what's the word I'm looking for? I can't say that fluency, that's the word I'm looking for. I can't say that fluency was ever something that was going to happen. Because once again, I didn't have anybody apart from the other people in my class, and we were all learning at the same time to practice French. I don't know that I've ever actually met a native French speaker. The parts of Canada that I've been to were not the French-speaking parts of Canada. So I don't know what to say. It's just like, once again, the Spanish might be the easiest one to pick up here in the United States. And I probably should have studied Spanish instead of French, but there you go. Anyway, that's it for today. Let me know your thoughts on any of the topics I discussed. And like and subscribe. Let me know if there's something strange about Americans that you'd like me to discuss down in the comments below, as always. And see you later.